Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Macro Sutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and this time we're going to be talking about one big pain point that seems to be emerging in a lot of the states that are going into the third phase of polling. We're looking at the third phase because that's the next phase, and also because we have inflation data for all of these states for the entire last financial year. And now we know that inflation at a countrywide level has been relatively high, but various states have been grappling with it at different levels. It's paining more in some areas and less in some areas. And all of these states are going to polls on May 7th. So to analyze all of this and to look at how climate change is emerging as a major policy priority that surely voters are going to look at, and also the policymakers are going to want to address. To look at all of this, we have with us Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you, Radhika, for joining us and for doing all of this analysis. So now, Radhika, which are the poll-bound states in the third phase that are seeing higher levels of inflation?
Yeah, so for the third phase, there are 10 major states that are going into elections, and of those, 4 states are experienced inflation higher than the national average. So that's our benchmark for analyzing which states inflation may be a bigger problem.
Right.
So we compare the national average, the all India average inflation for FY24 with the average inflation in each of the poll bound states, those that are going into for the third phase. And there we see that there are 4 states that experience inflation higher than the all India average. Now all India average inflation was also high. It is 5.36% for FY24. So those states that had inflation higher than that, namely Bihar, Karnataka, Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh. So these are the 4 states that had inflation, overall inflation. We can talk about food inflation next step, but overall inflation, these are the 4 states that had inflation above 5.34% at the average level for the full financial year.
So which were these states again? UP, Gujarat?
Yeah, Bihar.
Yeah,
and Uttar Pradesh.
And I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now within these states, do we know that whether the pain is being felt more in rural or in urban?
Yeah, so in of these 4 states, so we look at Bihar, Gujarat, Karnataka and UP, these are the 4 states. Of these 4 states, in 3 states, it is the rural inflation which is higher than the urban inflation. So excluding Bihar, so in Bihar, it is the urban inflation which is higher.
Right.
But in the other 3 states, that is Gujarat, Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh, it is the rural inflation which is higher than the urban inflation. So that is another point. And if we look at food inflation, because what we've talked about at an all India level, that inflation hike was primarily driven by food inflation.
Right.
So that is the story at the state level as well, that the main driver of inflation has been food inflation. And again, if we compare all India food inflation level with the food inflation in each of these 10 states, then we find that there are actually 5 states that experience food inflation higher than the all India level.
And food prices are a very emotive issue that people get really upset about. Naturally so.
Naturally so. So and that is why if we look at those states, then in addition to these 4 states, Madhya Pradesh is also added.
I see.
And of these poll-bound states, Madhya Pradesh had the highest food inflation in FY24. So it was so all India food inflation was 7%, 7.04%, and in each of these states, again like Bihar, Gujarat, Karnataka, UP, and Madhya Pradesh, food inflation was higher than 7.04%. And again, the drivers are different, mainly pulses, cereals and vegetables. But again, in each of these states, there is some different story emerging, because some of these states are top producers of these commodities as well. But even then, these states are facing high inflation levels. So for example, Madhya Pradesh.
Right.
Madhya Pradesh is the top producer of pulses in this country. But again, if we look at the pulses inflation data in Madhya Pradesh, it's above double digits. It's almost touching 20% inflation in 23-24. So pulses inflation is a very major problem that emerged in FY24. Cereal inflation we all know, but pulses inflation as well. And therefore, if we look at the agricultural imports data, we see that this time around pulses imports are doubled as compared to FY23. So,
But now, would cereal inflation actually affect the poor that much, given that they're getting free food grain from the government, 5 kgs every month per person? So would cereal inflation be such a factor that's upsetting people so much?
So again, that will have different impact in different states, because in each of these states the consumption pattern is different. And we have discussed this earlier, that the CPI, how CPI is constructed,
Right.
it is based on the consumption patterns of rural and urban households across different states, and based on the survey that is conducted, the consumer expenditure survey,
Yes.
the weights are arrived at. So in a state like Bihar, and particularly rural Bihar, the share of food in the overall consumption basket is above 60%. As compared to another state where the share is roughly 53 to 54%. So in a state where food occupies a major portion, and within food, cereals occupy a relatively higher proportion, there the impact of higher cereal prices would be disproportionately more
Higher.
as compared to a state where cereals occupy a relatively less proportion of the consumption basket. Both are getting, in fact, in some states, for example, in Karnataka, they are getting, in addition to 5 kgs rice, they have another scheme which is run by the state government,
Right.
which gives 5 kgs in addition to the 5 kg of rice which the central government provides. The state also provides 5 kg of rice, either in terms of commodity or in terms of money. They get the cash handout if they are not able to procure rice from either the neighboring states or from the central government.
Right.
So that is there, but again, the fact that consumption pattern in some states is highly skewed towards cereal, that will matter for the cereal prices, will definitely have an impact on household budget.
Right. And now, I mean, of course, neither of us are experts on politics and voting behavior, but economics is something that we do know. And when it comes down to it, the prices of commodities and especially food is quite important. It does upset a lot of people. It's not as if prices are low that they'll be happy and that they'll reward the government, but if prices are high, there are higher chances that they'll punish the incumbent government. That is the limit of our political analysis over here. But so now coming to the policy priorities that voters might want from their government, or that governments might want to implement to appease voters once they come in. Climate change seems to be a big issue now. It's affecting the production of various crops. As you said, there are these states that are producing large amounts of pulses or are the major producers, but they're seeing high levels of inflation in pulses. So,
correct. So we've discussed this earlier, that unseasonal rain and then heat, and then rain not occurring at the right time, but they occurring later on, had an impact on the yield and production of crops. So that same story plays out here, particularly for pulses, because in Madhya Pradesh, which is the top producer, the sown area was also lower, as well as production was also lower.
Right.
And the same condition holds true for Karnataka as well. In fact, in there, they have come up with what's called the medium-term fiscal policy document, which is like the central government releases this alongside budget. They have also released, and they have also analyzed that because of the unseasonal rains, there was increase in food prices, intensifying inflationary pressures. So climate change, unseasonal rains, heat has impacted the crop production and yields in FY24 as compared to 2022, despite various measures taken to incentivize farmers to grow more pulses. Minimum support prices were raised, guaranteed purchases were provided, but even despite of all these measures, pulses production was lower, and therefore we had to import more pulses. So climate change is definitely playing out in pulses, and also in case of vegetable. Because normally we know, as a household, we know that during winter there is a seasonal dip in vegetable prices, and during summers vegetable prices rise.
Right.
But this kind of a seasonal upswing and downswing we did not was absent in the last financial year. Again, due to the climate change, we did not notice the seasonal dip in vegetable prices in January, February to March. And in fact, if we just, we did a very simple exercise of comparing the CPI vegetable index
Right.
of Maharashtra in FY24 with the average CPI, the series, the Consumer Price Index vegetable price series of the previous years, taking the average, we see that in each of the month the CPI vegetable index is higher in FY24 as compared to the previous year. So all these are manifestations of the erratic rainfall impacting crop production, yields, and raising prices, and they are showing in different ways in different states, and particularly states that are top producers. They are noticing this. In Maharashtra, it's a top producer of onions.
By top, we should say, you mean literally the highest producers, or is it the short
Like-
form for tomatoes, onions, potatoes?
No, top means it's the highest producer of onions.
Right.
We can talk about tomato also, but we looked at some of these states. So Maharashtra is the highest dominant producer of onions, and there also they not only onion prices but even like garlic prices, brinjal. The prices were high, and in fact garlic prices were in triple-digit inflation. So these prices are rising due to climate change and erratic rainfall, and it's very much expressed by the mandi associations there. They are looking at the arrivals of the crop produce in mandis, and that's shown a noticeable dip in FY24 as compared to the previous.
So what are the kind of promises that a political party can make to the people, saying that these are the things we're going to do to address these shortfalls, or address how the climate is impacting crop yields?
Yeah, so see, the kind of policy intervention that have been taken till now by central government for the whole country as a whole, it's mostly in the form of export curbs. We have
Right.
seen that, non-basmati rice export was banned, onion export was banned, stock limits were imposed. So these are measures that have been implemented that could help in the short run, but they affect farmers' income. So these are not considered to be very effective measures, particularly when supply is limited. If supply is short because of lower production, then imposing stock limits by itself will not be very useful or helpful. So what is important is to come up with measures to limit the volatility in prices, and that's
Right.
one characteristic feature that we are noticing in inflation series across all states, that inflation has become very volatile. There are sharp upswings and downswings in inflation in vegetable prices, which are bound to be there, but now they have become more pronounced. So what can be done to address these upswings and downswings is focus more on storage facilities.
Right.
For example, in Maharashtra, they are taking some initiative to develop what is called onion storage banks. So some method to store onions, so that while it is a perishable commodity, some chemicals are added so that its freshness is maintained and they are able to store it for longer time period. So storage facilities, cold storage, logistics, agricultural infrastructure, all these methods are more important, as well as focus more on research and innovation for climate resistant seeds.
Right, of course.
And diversifying away from rice and wheat into other crops which have a greater export potential, where we can get higher export revenue. So these are some of the measures, because this time around what has happened is that our agri exports are also lower than FY23. In FY23, we were able to attain $50 billion of agri exports. This time it's lower because of the export curbs.
Of course.
So that is one reason, but we need to diversify, we need to develop a holistic strategy to improve agri exports, to enhance farmers' income, as well as focus internally on better storage facilities to curb the volatile swings in prices.
Right. And now, of course, when we're talking about inflation, we have a question from the audience, which is, when can we expect a cut in the repo rate by the RBI?
So again, that is something that will be data dependent, and if we look at the data, we don't see that in the near future there is expectation of a rate cut, because on the one side, as we've talked about, growth is quite strong. At least the headline numbers suggest that growth is quite strong, and inflation is still elevated. And the RBI governor has time and again spoken about the last mile disinflationary challenges, how to address the disinflation at the last mile. So unless and until all these steps are addressed, there is no pressing need to cut interest rates, given that if you look at the credit data that came out at the end of April, it is showing that credit is growing at a sharp pace. Credit to industry is picking up. So the first priority should be to bring inflation below the 4% level, or at least at the 4% level, because it's not just okay to have inflation at 5%, and also to ensure that food inflation is under control, because then food inflation will have impact on inflation expectations of households.
Right.
And we've talked about this in the various household surveys, that they are basically looking at food inflation. So the guidance on interest rate is very important to anchor inflation expectation. So I think till the inflation level shows a durable reduction to 4%, there is no possibility of, appears to be no possibility of cutting of interest rate. Also, internationally, if we see, we've talked about the US Fed has again dashed hopes of any rate cut in the few months. At least in this year also, there's very minimal possibility of a rate cut, because again, inflation has not reached the target, and oil prices is on the boil again. So all these factors will shape RBI's policy decision also to cut rates, and it will be data dependent.
Right. So there you go. There are 5 states that are going to polls in the third phase, where inflation seems to be an issue, and especially food inflation seems to be an issue. Now, there are various things that the state governments and the central government can do to ease these concerns, because a lot of it has to do with the impact of climate change, unseasonal rains, just heat waves when they aren't supposed to be heat waves, and basically this is impacting crop yields quite badly, and it's leading to very, very volatile inflation levels. So to control all of this, there are steps, things like implementing cold chains, implementing storage facilities, investing in high yield and climate resistant seed varieties. There are various steps that can be done. These are things that the voters will expect their new government to do, and these are of course things that the new government in these states and at the center will try to do, because food inflation especially is a very emotive issue, and governments in the past have also fallen on the basis of this. But on that note, that's all from us. Thank you so much for watching.